Okay, so the cosmic gospel contained. I don't need to talk a lot about this topic because it's something we know about already and we'll teach again on into the future. But the ongoing value of the Moedim. Now I'm leading kind of into the kind of stuff that affects you and me that we can do something about. This is how we engage in spiritual warfare to an extent. Now that's what we're looking at here. So a few things, and I've got to put this disclaimer first because it's so often assumed, and maybe there are people in the Messianic Jewish movement as Jews who get this wrong, and maybe there's just overexcited Gentiles who make a problem with this too. So I want to be very clear. I don't propose and uphold and encourage and promote the Moedim because it gets anyone saved. Only Jesus saves. Jesus in the person who he is. However, even in saying that, the next things are also equally important. So I want to be clear, Jesus saves. But in the process of Jesus saving, these other points are valid when it comes to the Moedim. Number one that I'm going to share, it's God's idea. The Moedim belong to God. It's how he did it. I've explained over the last few weeks about how quite possibly the nations were given the responsibility of the Moedim to priest and to declare into the heavens who the real God is, and they screwed that up, and that's probably why it ends up with Israel. So that's a big deal. The other thing that I love and I think is quite true is that the Moedim both conceal and reveal a battle plan that God has. Paul says as much. It's Paul who says that if the powers of darkness had known what the crucifixion would lead to the resurrection, they would have kept him alive. That's Passover, and that's first fruits. Those are Moedim. There's your battle plan, concealed, revealed, and it's a beautiful one that ends up giving them awareness of the very unfortunate future that these rebels have coming their way, as they already know because they can ask Jesus not to torment them, so they know. Um, Jesus lived to confirm its history. You know, one of the big things about being Jewish is that you've got to remember your history and know your story. And I believe that's true of anyone, of any culture, of any family that should keep their history alive and pass it on to future generations. So that's not a unique thing for Israel. But, you know, Jesus lived the history of the Moedim, which is a big part of it, starting with the fact that Moses gave the Moedim to us as teachers right at the start of our journey as Jews, and our job was to obviously teach the nation. So again, it's a big deal, and Jesus lives this. You can see it in the Gospels that he acknowledges it as such. So there's another reason for us to be keeping it alive. This is another big one. It defined Jesus' identity and purpose. Okay, so like Jesus apart from the Moedim is not the Messiah, and he's not a credible character. And that's what's so dangerous about overeager Christians who think they're saving Jesus from a dead religion called Judaism. They are actually creating a false Jesus when they separate him from the Moedim. I understand that 9 times out of 10 it's done from a good place of trying to do the right thing, but it's just a lack of education. But the Moedim defines Jesus' identity and purpose. And again, that's God's idea. This is why Jesus had to live so strictly according to it, and why I believe even into the future he has to come back. And that's why I say this next one is that the Moedim are still speaking prophetically because there's still things that they carry for us that must still come into the future. And ultimately, what I always say about the Moedim, they are about God's credibility. It's not about Israel. It's not ours. We are entrusted with it, again, as Paul says in Romans 9, verse 4 and 5. Jews are entrusted with it, but it doesn't belong to us like we created it, like we've got to administer it. We've got to be priests of it. We've got to use it to teach the world. And then Gentiles who are coming in need to pick up that same mantle. So it's a big deal. And again, let me just conclude by saying again, I'm not saying doing the Moedim gets you saved. Jesus saves, not anything else. And I mean, but again, that's a complex thing as well. I just got to be so careful because it just goes all over the place when people start misassuming things. This is a big one, and I don't want to depress you on this morning or this evening, wherever you are in the world, but the fight is inescapable. You are in the middle of a spiritual warfare battle, whether you think you are or not, whether you signed up for it or not, doesn't matter. You are you in it. Um, I know for my father's generation and backwards, if the army called you up for service, you didn't get to say you're not in the mood for it. If you refused that, you were a criminal. You could be jailed. I'm pretty sure. I've heard stories of people that have been jailed and you would be considered basically an enemy of your own state. And in the same way, the spiritual warfare is inescapable. You're not getting a choice. You are in it, even if you passively, ignorantly sticking your head in the ground with your backside exposed. You are in it. There's no one's getting out of it. And that's a sobering thought that people need to become aware of. Another thing I wanted to point out is that Jewish history is war. Take snapshots of Jewish history in the Tanakh. What do you bump into every time you turn around in Jewish history? A battle, a war somewhere. And again, we know that it's not just about literal physical people battling literal physical people, as Paul also states. It's against a supernatural host that's antagonizing the situation. And we know that's true. So again, this is another like sobering thing. You are following a Jewish Messiah whose history is about war. And as I said to you already, Hanukkah was with the remnant of Hanukkah, the effects of it was still happening when Jesus comes on the scene. And he comes to deal with some of that fallout too. The next thing that it's going to sound like really overly simplified, but yet it's a valid point that I want to show you. Paul said what? Paul said, we battle. I don't want to read further. I don't need to read further. Just stop there. Paul said, we battle. That's it. Like, I mean, that's a statement that you can take to the bank because that's it. And he implied it with this kind of intensity to say, listen, guys, this is happening. You're not getting out of this. So I think that's, I want to do soberly remind us of that. So now, obviously, what's the logical next step we're going to say here? So what can we do? Because it would be useless if I tell you all of this and then we just stop dead. That wouldn't help at all. So for the last section now, that's what I want to look at. What do? We are caught in this battle, we're caught in this situation, and this is not going to be exhaustive. I've already given you one option is to say that we have the Moedim, and they are important, and they are, a weapon of warfare effectively in multiple ways, as a teaching tool, as a way of centering us on what matters, on a way of worshiping God, and a way of acknowledging Jesus, of clearly drawing a line in the sand of whose side we're on. The Moedim does all of that. So there's a whole lot of methods on its own. I've got some generic ones, just generalized ones that I'm using here now, where I say this first one here is study the truth. And that is a very open ended statement. I mean, want the truth because, like I always say, if you're looking for the truth, it will find you. And I'm a firm believer of that. And when I say the truth, if you know you're reading a Jewish text, which you obviously are, that's where you're going to find the truth. Jesus said he's the way, the life, and the truth. So it's him, not in rabbinical Judaism, not in Orthodox, not in Reform, in Jesus. That is my claim, and I can make that claim as much as any Jew makes any claim they want to make. And trust me, they're not shy to make claims against me on Quora. So I'm just going to return the favor to they are my family, but I'm happy to fight with them. Another one, become articulate in explaining it to others. You might find when you learn something new, you try and say it to someone else, you might, in your eagerness, stumble over your own words, or just because you're not experienced with it, work at it, practice it, talk to people. Tell them when you do talk to them, say, listen, I'm just learning this fresh, so I might get something a little bit off here, but here's what I've been learning, and here's what I want to tell you. Especially if the Spirit moves you to do this. You know, we've got to work on it. It's a skill. You've got to develop the skill and share with them the stuff because that's the part of the gospel. That's the mission of the gospel that we have to do. Define a lifestyle based on the truths, that takes us right back to the Modim, which is the easiest ways to create a new kind of lifestyle culturally that's not Jewish for the sake of being Jewish. It's not, I don't want to call it Jewish. It's following, moving in the pattern towards finding what God has done. Of course, not undermining God's covenantal um, fidelity with Israel. That's still in place. So I'm not saying ignore the Jewishness and get bombastic against Jews either. That's also not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying you don't have to, you're not a second rate citizen as a Gentile. You don't have to ask Jews permission to do it, but you should probably ask Jews advice and help and assistance as older brothers and sisters in doing this. That I would say. But the lifestyle based on the truth, the simplest way to do this for me is the Moedim. I don't think you get simpler than that. Now, more Next, I want to say very much more specific methods. These are more defined, and you'll be able to get a more firm grip on this, I think, the minute you see it. Number one, pray. And yeah, I mean open-ended prayer, which we all probably do at different times in different ways. We all get given prayer requests from friends and family when we know there's struggle and need or whatever. We pray. That's spiritual warfare. You're doing it right there. So well done. That you're doing it. You're doing Modim. You're doing study tonight. You are in spiritual warfare, just learning. So well done there too. You're getting this stuff going. If you're trying to find out how to live this life according to the Jewish faith that you followed without becoming Jewish, because you can't become Jewish unless, of course, you're either born that way or you marry into a Jewish family. So don't crack your head open about that one. You don't need to go through all that effort unless you're legally bound to something of that kind. Pray prophecy. Um, uh, you look in the Old Testament, look in the Tanakh, you're going to find prophetic statements everywhere, declarations of God's power. Look at what I shared about Psalm 68. You pray that stuff. You are, what do we say, careful, because I don't want to sound charismatic here. You are making declarations, but it's not your declarations. You are not in charge of anything. When you're praying prophecy, you're actually declaring God's declarations, spirit inspired declarations, let's call it that. Declare the truth. Again, praying prophecy would just do that on its own. Declaring truth in general about Jesus, about the fact that there can be only one God. Or, I mean, there's multiple ways to do that. Promoting what's right, justice, fairness. That's truth, and that's right, and that's part of your job as a spiritual warrior involved in spiritual warfare. This next one is without question so important, and I need to explain why I say serving is spiritual warfare. This is going to immediately start tying into the supernatural realm and why they were rebels and why they are waiting punishment from God. And it's going to explain a lot of why Jesus is who he is, and that's where we're going to end. We're going to explain why Jesus took the role he did. And it's going to directly relate to the same thing as to why service is such a powerful weapon in spiritual warfare. And the reason is because these gods were seeking, self seeking worship and egotistically putting themselves ahead at the expense of others. That's why when we serve and we love, we're effectively in the most powerful form of spiritual warfare. What did Jesus push continuously with his disciples? Serve and love. Did you know? Have you noticed that with Jesus? Serve and love becomes a constant. And now, if you understand the effects of the watchers, how they fell, and their egotistical nature, as I said, their self-centeredness, their jealousy, their just the corrupt way they are. That effectively Jesus is saying, let's be anti watchers who rebelled and fell. Let's be anti their Nephilim offspring's way. Yeah, you are into spiritual warfare of the highest kind. If we are serving even those that don't serve us or that we don't get anything back for, and loving, which is very difficult, especially for me, I won't deny that. I don't enjoy suffering fools much. But like Nande will tell you, when it comes to ministry and teaching, I absorb a considerable amount. And I'm not looking for a pat on the back from anyone. I have to do it. If I want to follow my rabbi, I have to do it. So I'm glad to do it, glad to serve in that way, and I want to learn to love better. I've got some work to do there. But these are Moedim, loving the truth, the other stuff I said on the previous slide, and these. This is spiritual warfare. Now, something you might notice, I didn't once mention telling you how to find a demon and bind it and cast it out and throw salt here and put oil there. It's nonsense. That's fanfare and it's immature and irresponsible. It's just going to promote superstition, which already I know Nanda and his family can probably talk for hours about in terms of how witch doctors and sangomas and so on get to flipping do the nonsense they do because people start believing in all the nonsense they get told through that. Christianity, when it starts getting into its charismatic Ghostbuster mode, is doing the same thing. What I'm showing you here, this is the responsible spiritual warfare that we should be getting into. And we are not going to be talking to demons or confronting them or doing anything of the kind. I want to take you back to one of the very old teachings I've done, Our Father in Heaven, a Jewish perspective on prayer. Now, I'm not going to say too much. I've got quite a few of the slides here, but I don't want to read them all out completely because it's just too much. You can check these out and pause them for yourself if you end up watching this on YouTube again too. Basically, the Hebrew word for tefillah comes from palal, to judge. We use the reflective verb lahev palal, to pray, which also means to judge oneself. So prayer is a time of self-judgment and self-evaluation when we address uh, when a person addresses himself to God and prays for his blessings. He must inevitably search his heart and examine himself if he measures up. Now, this, I mean, you can see the rest of Jesus. This is, can you see why I say prayer is spiritual warfare? Because it just automatically just starts shifting where you are and what you're thinking. You're judging, you're cleansing yourself, you're coming before God. If you understand what you're doing when you're coming before God, of course. So that becomes important. And then another quote here. Uh, Hello?
Darren,
Yes.
can I ask what you think about deliverance?
Kathy, my initial answer is I want to almost say to you, I don't think about it because I think it's dangerous. Um, do I think it's necessary in some circumstances to actually do an exorcism? Yes, there can be. I don't think the number of people doing it and offering it and proclaiming that they're doing it is right, responsible, or advisable to any extent. I think it's a very complex situation. It's a dangerous situation that could end up damaging the person that is being held captive. It's dangerous to their family. It could lead to death effectively. It could lead to even deeper possession if not handled very well. So, I guess what I'm saying is avoid it as far as possible. Confirm it's necessary before you start creating problems that don't need to be created, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, but in a lesser sense, for instance, early on in my Christian walk, I was delivered from Catholicism.
yeah, you see, Kathy, now that's exactly an example of why I think it's dangerous. I don't know how you can be delivered from Catholicism. Um,
Yeah,
I get, look, I get the mystical, metaphorical action of, burning stuff that you had from it or walking through a doorway, in some kind of symbolic activity. But I don't know how you get delivered from Catholicism, because if Catholicism defined your culture and your upbringing, it's part of your identity. You can't just be delivered from that overnight. Um, that's going to take years of work.
very good answer.
It's going to take years of work, and you are in that process. But Kathy, you know as well as I do that even for a long period of time, you've still been wrestling with what you've learned from Catholicism, right? Am I right or wrong?
You're right. Absolutely, yeah.
You see, so and that's not a bad thing. I'd be worried, Kathy, if all your life spent in Catholicism it didn't impact you at all. That would be more frightening. So it's logical. It starts defining who you are. How do you get delivered from who you are that easily? Like someone just snaps their fingers and it's all done. That's ridiculous. So
Yeah.
that's you've given a perfect example of where charismatic Christianity, meaning well, I don't doubt they mean well, are complicating an issue. Because you then tend to make people looking for demons behind every bush too, and that just gets out of hand. Um, so yeah,
Darren,
I would narrow down the scope of what deliverance is exponentially. I mean, it would get majorly weird. Look, I've been involved in situations like this before. Let me tell you, Kathy, I become like Sherlock Holmes before I say or do anything in the process. There's hundreds of questions and processing and praying, and I would never just walk into a situation like that without having people praying for me and to be sure that I've got myself ready and there's people praying. I'd rather not do it. Let's say that, if that gives you an indication of what I think. I'm not
Thank
saying I
you.
could always walk away from it. If I think there's an actual situation which is unavoidable and that process needs to be engaged, but I wouldn't go looking for it. if
Yeah.
that makes
Thank
sense.
you. Yeah.
Okay, so this next, the temple and prayer, another quote from a Jewish source here. Prayer is considered the service of God similar to the sacrifice of the Holy Temple. The psalmist said, "Let my prayer be set forth as incense before you. The lifting of my hands is the evening sacrifice." I don't even need to read more. It is beautiful, right? That's spiritual warfare again, because we know that the temple actually represents God's abode. So the temple, and if prayer is an element of that, every time you're praying, you're effectively entering a metaphorical temple. Yes, that's beautiful. That's spiritual warfare, and we need to do that because we are keeping the prayer, the praise of God as it needs to be, along with the remaining uh, host of heaven who have not rebelled. We join them in declaring God's goodness and His actual position. Some of you might remember this slide. Again, not going to go too much into this. The Shemone Esrei, which is the 18 benedictions, which I love. These are beautiful. If you've ever looked at them, you'll know what I mean. We're going to look at a few of them now on the screen that I'll get on as well. But the point is, again, this shows you the depth and the powerful nature of prayer, which is not too surprising when you consider that Jews are meant to be priests. But please note, as a Gentile who is drawing near to the one true God and coming home effectively, you are invited to pray these prayers too. I encourage you to do so, especially when you see some of these. So here's some of them that I've pulled out to look at sanctification of God. We will sanctify your name in this world just as it is sanctified in the highest heavens. How beautiful is that? I get excited. As it is written by your prophet, and they call out to one another and say, and here's what the congregation would repeat if we do this in a congregational setting. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Welcome to spiritual warfare and prayer. Another one for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Return in mercy to Jerusalem, your city, and dwell in it as you have promised. Rebuild it soon in our days as an eternal structure, and quickly set it up. Set up in it the throne of David. Blessed are you, O Lord, who rebuilds Jerusalem. It is. I feel like it's honey dripping down my lips when I read this. For the Messianic King, speedily cause the offspring of your servant David to flourish. Let him be exalted by your saving power. For we wait all day long for your salvation. We wait all day long for your Yeshua. That's what that word would be, which means we can translate it. We wait all day long for your Jesus. Hey, hey, hey. Blessed are you, O Lord, who causes Jesus to flourish. I love it. I can't get enough of it. For the restoration of the temple service, this might make Christians hit out in rashes now because they think the temple's gone. Be pleased, O Lord our God, with your people Israel and with their prayers. Restore the service to the inner sanctuary of your temple and receive in love and with favor both the fire offerings of Israel and their prayers. May the worship of your people Israel always be acceptable to you, and let our eyes behold your return in mercy to Zion. Blessed are you, O Lord, who restores his divine presence to Zion. These are beautiful prayers. And so that shows you that element. And you know, this, I wanted to show you this
Yeah.
picture. Yes,
I'm not sure if I'm mistaken with this one, but that they call the Amidah, right? Those prayers.
yes.
Um, I've heard it said that the Lord's Prayer, the one Jesus says, he kind of like summarizes all of them in a
Oh,
way.
yes, without
And
question. If you look at all of them, you compare them, Jesus pretty much summarized, or summarized. I believe personally that some of the Amidah was actually based on what Jesus had done. Don't tell the non-Messianic Jews, they might choke on their spit if they hear me saying that. I'm suggesting that I think to a large extent the Amidah might have been, in fact, inspired also by Jesus. That's an argument I'm happy to continue having with Jews, though. Um,
yeah.
so you can look at it two ways. Jesus took the Amidah, or the Amidah to some extent was based on some of what Jesus had also done. I think both can be true. Both are positive
Mm-hmm.
things, at least. So, yeah. Other important thing to note is the Amidah is called the standing prayer. That's what it is. Because if you're in God's presence, you're not going to chill out like He's homey. Which again, I find to be kind of a problem in a lot of charismatic Christianity, where people get overly familiar with God. Um, yeah, I think that's a problem. I don't want to spend too much time saying that though. The picture I've got now, you see the dragons and you see a warrior. This looks like some fantasy game, right? You know what this picture could so easily be used to describe as well? Certain scenes in the book of Revelation. which now has to make you wonder, is God part of Hollywood? Or is Hollywood, as I said, just understanding the reality of what's going on around us? If you read the book of Revelation, it looks like some sci-fi movie. In fact, it probably makes less sense than Stephen King's movies and books make, dealing with the same content. And my point of pointing that out is to say to you, the spiritual warfare issue is unavoidable. It's always been around and it's going to be around till the end. You're already in it. You might as well get clued up in what's going on around you or become a victim of it. You don't need to become a victim, and that's the point of what I want to encourage you with. So I wanted to close with something very powerful and important. As I said, Jesus is my favorite topic to talk about, so I had to make this about him ultimately. What motivated Jesus to be the son he was? Now, Jesus comes down as the Son of God. We know that. And again, I love Jesus. I know he died on the cross. I've got no problem with that. I'd be a fool if I did. Now, I know that he was resurrected. I'd be a fool again if I didn't know that. The reason why I've got to so often down talk the cross on its own is because of what Christianity has done with it. It's turned it into a religion all on its own, and that's a problem. So now I want to show you, by highlighting again a teaching I've done before, just a little element of it, why I believe Jesus became the son that he did. Yeah, you can remember, if you remember this teaching I did, the resurrected and the dead, what else Jesus did between the cross and the empty grave, because that's important. Now, in that session, I'd spoken about words you can't ignore, like death, Rephaim, and Bashan. Now, Bashan is another area where the satanic stuff, the dark forces, the fallen watchers, sin, death, all of that had taken place, and Jesus deliberately moves into that space and causes trouble there. And then, of course, Psalm 82, verse 6 and 7, which is such powerful words too. This is God declaring judgment on those lesser gods who sin. I said, you are gods, sons of who? Sons of the Most High. Who did we look at earlier that gets their same title? Someone tell me. I don't want to say it. Someone needs to tell me. Who did I say earlier was given the same title from demons? Are there people who know it, but they're scared?
Wasn't it the demons addressing Jesus, Darren?
Thank you. That's it. Exactly that. So can you see it? Yeah, what's going on? They calling demons are calling him Son of the Most High. He didn't call them Elias, so he acknowledges that's his title. And yeah, God is saying to these fallen beings, you are gods, you are sons of the, it's the exact same title given to Jesus. But these will die and fall like any prince. Now, the point I want you to see is, tell me, can you escape the fact that Jesus effectively then, in this context, has brothers? And no, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. I think it's the Jehovah's Witnesses that get close, but then also twist this. Jesus had brothers. Well, I don't know. Are they sons of the Most High? Was Jesus the Son of the Most High? And this is my point of what I'm saying. Why did Jesus come as the Son he did? Please, that's my point here. There's no one like Jesus and what he did. And that's the point of what I want to show you. But you cannot tell me you can't see that if in Mark it says that he's called the Son of the Most High, and he doesn't deny that title. And now, yeah, in Psalm 82, these watchers, these higher level beings, celestial beings, are also sons of the Most High. They will die. Jesus died too. There's another thing he's got in common with them. What is, they will fall like any prince. We know there's evil princes. What is Jesus also called in Isaiah in relation to a prince?
Prince of Peace, I think, D.
There we go. Isn't it getting awkward, Nande? Can you see how awkward this is getting, how much Jesus has in common with these other celestial beings? Of course, what you notice is his labels have a positive spin, though, don't they? Because if he's the Prince of Peace, that means he's the Prince of Shalom. He's the Prince of what's good. These guys aren't. That's another indication of what Jesus came to do. And again, I love the scripture of Paul's, and you can see I used it in this teaching as well that we did, where I showed you this, that Jesus gets to that level and gets that promotion effectively. So there's that. That's important to note. And again, this is it literally at the end now. I want to say it again. We are obsessed with things of a supernatural nature as human beings, generally religious or non-religious. We are obsessed with it. We readily embrace it in fantasy stories, in games, in movies, not because we are totally detached from it, quite the opposite. It's because we know it so well. It's because we are actually so in touch with that side of things. It resonates with the deepest part of who we are. The only question is, it's inescapable to avoid. The only question is, which side of the fight do you want to be on? And are you prepared for what's coming and what's already around you effectively? So the final thing I want to say about what kind of son did Jesus come to be? His whole modus operandi as the son he came to be is in direct opposition to what the previous sons of God had done. They were haughty and they wanted high levels. What did Jesus do? Paul tells you he took the role of a servant. They came with violence and misused their power. Jesus refused to even use his power apart from his Father when he's being tempted and he needs to preserve his own human body. When he tells this Satan, not necessarily Lucifer, when he tells him, man won't live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, he couldn't be more humble if he tried. And why did he have to do all of that? He's undoing, he's reversing the effects of the fallen sons of God. So you could, in a large extent, say Jesus epitomizes the very opposite of what the previous sons of God had came and screwed up, in terms of God's credibility, in terms of showing reciprocal love back to their creator. So Jesus reverses all of that, right? Does he look for a name? No, he takes a low position of a servant. And what's the result of that? Because of all of those things he does, what does God say? For that, I will give you what? A name above all names. Is that ironic? Is that coincidental? No. What happened at Babel? What were the people trying to do? They want to make a name for themselves. Shem, they wanted to make a name for themselves. The demons, the watchers that fell, they were doing the same thing. So Jesus humbles himself in every conceivable way. And for that humbling of himself, he gets lifted to the highest levels. Now, I mean, we could talk for hours on just pulling all those scriptures out on what's said about Jesus and saying, hey, so that's a parallel to what the Nephilim did. That's a parallel to what the Watchers did. And we could see the beauty of Jesus would just start getting clearer and clearer. But if we do that, we'll be here till tomorrow morning. So I'm giving you some homework. You go and do it. Go and analyze the thing Jesus does and see how many times you're going to find his actions, his posture as a son is in direct opposition to those fallen watchers who have hurt God, who have pained God's heart, who have rebelled against him. He comes and says, I'm going to epitomize the son that does everything right for my Father who I love, to show just how abominable those things were that the previous sons of God have done. And furthermore, what does Jesus do to show how different he is as a son? He shows mercy on mankind, where these other gods were vicious and bullies, really, overstepping their boundaries. And this is why we can honestly bow our knee to Jesus. That's why, unlike the other gods, we are allowed to bow our knee to Jesus, because he's been given that honor for the humble nature that he took. No other angel. Think about the other celestial beings that were still good celestial beings. Did they allow worship? No. They knew what their other brothers, inverted commas, had done, the ones that are on the same class as them, so they would never do it. Jesus could receive worship, though, because he was already given that ability, and his humble nature allowed for him to receive that. And of course, in the millennial kingdom, every knee will literally bow to Jesus, to the glory of his Father, ultimately, of course. I'm going to stop myself now because I
Darren,
can feel I want to go on a tangent. Yes.